That's our theme song from Bakersfield. My name is Jocelyn, and I'm an alcoholic. Very grateful to be here this evening with you all. I want to thank my friend Scott for asking me to come, and I want to thank you, Scott, for being so hospitable and welcoming, and I want to thank Michelle, where you at, Michelle, and Randy, where you at, Randy, for joining us for the meeting before the meeting, and I want to thank my husband, who just celebrated 6 years of sobriety. I want to thank you for always making the trip with me and just being a huge part of my sobriety. So my sobriety date is September 13th of 2016. I have a sponsor who knows that she is my sponsor. I have a set time that I call her every week, 9 years into this deal. And I have the privilege and the honor of walking other women through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a home group, and I have several commitments. And I don't tell you that to gloss up my AA resume like, woo, look at me. It's because I don't know which one of those things keeps me more sober, right? And so I do all of those things because what has happened is the result of working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and sticking around a few years. I have an incredible life today. It's a life beyond my wildest dreams, you know, as the cliche goes on. And so I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I definitely don't want to go back to where I was. And I'm just so grateful. You know, I identify as an alcoholic because I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. I take a drink and I don't want to stop, and I might stop, but then I'm obsessing on getting the next drink, right? And early on in my drinking career, you know, I would drink and I would wake up in strange places with strange people doing strange things, and I'd wonder, how in the heck did I get here? And I'd swear I was never going to do it again, right? And I'd wake up and I'd just be like, oh my God, I'm never doing that again. But the obsession of my mind would tell me, you're just hanging out with the wrong people. You're just drinking the wrong thing. If you did this over here, it'll be different, right? And so I would go weeks, months, and not drink. So if you would have told me I was an alcoholic early on in my drinking, I would have said, you're crazy. I don't drink every day. I don't act like an alcoholic, right? And you know, that just goes on. And so I'm going to back up a little bit. I was afforded every opportunity as a child. I was adopted by two very well-meaning parents that, were great parents, right? And I've heard another speaker say this, and the only problem with my family was that I was in it, right? But at the age that you know, at the young age of, I don't know, as early back as I can remember, like age 6, I was not the problem. It was definitely everybody else. I had a gaping hole of fear and not enoughness. I would see the way my friends' families would interact. I'd be like, well, why doesn't my family interact like that? You know, I would see what my brother got for Christmas. Well, why didn't I get that for Christmas? They must not love me the same way they love my brother, right? And it was just never enough, right? And I was never a liar because I was just this compulsive liar. I would embellish the truth because it was very important to me what you thought of me. It was so important that I just wow you with my story, and I had no reason to lie. I took my first drink in Spain, right? And so at the age of 12, you know, I have my first drink, and like many of us can relate to, it gave me that sense of ease and comfort, right? That gaping hole of fear and not enoughness temporarily went away, and I'm like, man, I'm going to do whatever I can to get more of this, right? And of course, at the age of 12, living in Spain, alcohol was not readily available. My parents were not alcoholic, and my behavior started to get out of control, and my parents were very concerned about my mental health. So they made the decision to move back to the States, and we landed in Ridgecrest, California. They have a little military base over there. And, I felt like I had arrived. I was like, yeah, this is the place, right? Because I could get what I needed to, shut this up, fill up that gaping hole. And, so I was drinking intermittently. Anytime I drank, I would overshoot the mark. And my behavior just increasingly spiraled out of control. I'm stealing alcohol at the stores. I'm doing all kinds of crazy stuff at school. So I'm eventually, I'm getting suspended. Then I'm eventually expelled. My parents are at their wits' end. They don't know what to do. And then I start going to juvenile hall, in and out of juvenile hall, and then the little stints would get longer and the facilities would get further away. And eventually my parents, they just did not know what to do, and I became a ward of the court. And then I ended up visiting some group homes here in the state of California. And I became very resentful, very bitter. Like, why did you even bother adopting me? I could take no accountability for my behavior. And it was all their fault. And if they would have just done this, things would have been different. And but what that looked like for me is at the age of 17, I'm in an emancipation group home in Stockdale, and I have a little part-time job, and by all appearances, it looks as though I'm doing well. So my parents decide to allow me to come back home, and I go back home to Ridgecrest, and it's a matter of months before I'm off and running again. I have no solution. My only solution is that next drink, and what that looked like for me is. I got pregnant with my first son at 18, and I desperately wanted to be a good parent. I wanted to love my son the way I felt like my family had never loved me, and I was ill-equipped. I was basically raised by the state throughout my adolescence. I was not equipped to be a parent, and I ended up with 3 kids, 3 different baby daddies, all kinds of crazy relationships, right? Just dragging my kids through all of that, and I always like to share this when I get to this part of my story, because one of the gifts of working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is I am not a victim today, right? Those relationships that I got into, I could tell you some stories and I could play, victim up here, but I sought out those relationships because I needed them to be as sick as I was, because I needed to feel better about myself, right? And if they weren't sick enough, I'm going to make you, right? I'm going to push you, hit me, I dare you. And then I'm like, oh my God, look what he did to me. I'm such a victim, right? And what I got to do is look at that from an entirely different angle as the result of doing a thorough 4th and 5th step and seeing where I'm entirely to blame in these situations. And I put myself in these situations, right? But I drag my kids through this. And, I really thought Ridgecrest was my problem. If I could just get out of this one-horse dirt town and move up to the big city of Bakersfield, right? I went to the junior college in Ridgecrest, and it took me like 3.5 years to get 60 units, C- average, right? Doing the most with the student loans, just, party, right? But I got enough credits to finally get a county job in Bakersfield, the big city. So I'm going to move to Bakersfield with my 3 kids, and I'm going to show everyone that Ridgecrest was my problem, right? So I sweep my past under the carpet. They don't bring up my juvenile record. I get a job with the county. I'm working I'm working for the Department of Human Services and Employment Services, which is cash aid, food stamps, and Medi-Cal. And I just think I'm the shit, right? I'm just, I'm sorry. And, I work alcoholically. So I go into this job and I step on toes and I climb my way up and I eventually become a supervisor. And, and what happened for me is I started going to happy hour with my coworkers. And it's when I crossed that invisible line. Everybody would want to go home, and I'd be like, I'm not ready to go home. Where's the after party, right? And here, I have this job. I have these 3 kids at home, and I'm going downtown to the clubs at, I don't even know. I was like in my early 30s or late 20s, and I got these kids at home, and I got this job, and all I could care about was the party, right? And eventually some really embarrassing, demoralizing things would happen downtown at the club. So then I started looking for the dive bars, right? And eventually that job wasn't important anymore. And I was taking stress leave and all these things because I'm a union employee, don't you know? You can't touch me. And, just all of the things. And, I was leaving my kids home alone before they were old enough to be left home alone. And I was really good at making things appear as though they looked really good because I had a really good job and I had a really nice new little car and we had a nice new little home, right? But there were times that I didn't buy groceries because I needed money to drink, and that is my truth. And I always say, there were allegations where Child Protective Services would come out, but I can hold it together and I can make things appear as they are not. That is absolutely not the truth. That is, and they believe me, and I would just go on, doing the same thing. But eventually, my alcoholism progressed. I'm not going to the bars anymore because I'm having all of these crazy consequences. And I'm not even calling out from this job. And my friend tells me, Jocelyn, they're going to fire you. And by this point, I had been with the county for 10 years. I'm like, they can't fire me. She goes, no, they're really going to fire you. And so I resigned from that job for medical reasons. And, and I thought I was just bamboozling everybody. I really thought that people believed the lie. But, I know now, looking looking back in retrospect, it was so obvious, you know, it was just so obvious. And what that looked like for me was a great reason to just continue to drink. And that's what I did. I was drinking in the morning. I was waking up at 6. I was the one with the big sunglasses, the baseball cap at 6 a.m., swapping stores so people wouldn't recognize me. Before long, they're all my best friends, right? And, you know, and this went on. And, you know, my alcoholism progressed, and I was having a really hard time holding it together. And, you know, my parents were still in Ridgecrest, and they wanted to move to Florida. And so they wanted me to bring the kids to Ridgecrest for Labor Day weekend get-together. My sister was going to come from college, and my brother was going to be there. And I really desperately wanted to go and show them it's not as bad as it looks or it seems, right? It's not that bad. So I thought, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do some controlled drinking so I can make it to Ridgecrest, right? And I had, you know, my 3 kids. I had a large enough SUV. My daughter asked me if her best friend and her best friend's little brother could come on the trip, and I said yes. And we barely made it to Ridgecrest. You know, I'm crawling out of my skin. I can't wait to take a drink. And I take that drink, and I do what any good alcoholic does, is I overshoot the mark. I come to the next day on Labor Day, and I'm sick. And if I don't drink, there's no way I'm going to be able to function, you know, with my family. And so I continue to drink. And I know that I have to get behind the wheel of the car with those 5 kids, you know, and 2 of them weren't mine. But I made that decision to continue to drink. And I felt like I had no choice. I had to drink. And, you know, later in the afternoon, I got behind the wheel of the car with those 5 kids. And 45 minutes into the drive, I lost control of my vehicle. We rolled twice, and my 12-year-old daughter passed away on impact. And I would love to be up here telling you that since then, you know, that was it, right? And that is not my story. I had a break from reality. All I could think about was myself in the midst of my grief. Don't you know how I feel? I lost my only daughter. Don't you tell me how I should feel? Nothing could suffice. And I had no, you know, superficially, of course, I cared about my kids, the other kids that were in the car. Of course I did, right? But really, this selfish, self-centered alcoholic, I could not see past myself. I knew I was going to prison because I had a couple of misdemeanors, lingering DUIs, and I knew they were going to send me to prison, and that is all I could think about. And anytime anybody would try to tell me anything, you know, family members, whatever, I would be like, you know, I don't want to hear it. You have no idea what I'm going through, how I feel. I had no regard for what everybody else went through, you know, through that. And, you know, I was granted a lot of leniency when I went to court. They believed the lie that it was just a tragic accident, and this poor mother lost her only daughter on Labor Day, right? They believed the lie, and I was given 6 years in state prison with half-time. And what I want to tell you today is, you know, all of these years later, I sponsor a woman that is sitting in prison doing life for the same charge, and she had no prior convictions. You know, so I know what an honor and a privilege it is to be here with you sharing my story. It's very important that I do this, right? And so I go to prison, and, you know, I'm on the level 4 yard. I have to go through all the things, right? See things that no human should have to endure in a lifetime, right? All the things. But I make it to the fire camp in Malibu, CC13 Malibu. And H and I would come in, and, you know, I was so full of myself and so full of self-knowledge. And, you know, I could read those steps, and, oh, I could do that. As a matter of fact, I just heard somebody say this in a meeting. You know, because I was raised Catholic, right? So, you know, I'm like, oh, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that, you know? And I just was so full of I'm gonna. When I get out, I'm gonna, right? And so what happens? I get out, I go to meetings, and I feel like I can't relate to any of you. You can't relate to me. I don't get any phone numbers. I'm the first one to leave because I don't want you talking to me. I'm the last one to get there, right? And what do you think happens? You know, and after that accident, I drank. I had no other solution, you know, and I ended up drinking. I picked up and I drank, and what that looked like, being on high control parole for vehicular manslaughter, right, gross vehicular manslaughter, is that I ended up going in and out of prison on parole violations for 5 years, and that, you know, no human power could have relieved my alcoholism. And what that looked like for me was 9.5 years of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I'm unemployable, right? My family has just washed their hands of me. I had a house that my parents paid off the mortgage so that my kids would be taken care of, through my chaos and destruction. And the way I'd keep the lights on is I'd rent out rooms off of Craigslist, and then when I'd get fed up, I'd steal their stuff, change the locks, move somebody else in. I mean, it was just insanity. And that I tell you, that is really how I lived my life. I'd come into meetings, get a few months sober, get a job, lose it after a month. There's just the repetitive cycle of just not being able to understand what surrender meant, right? Not being there, not having that moment of clarity. And this just goes on and on and on for years. And I'm going in and out of the emergency rooms like a revolving door. And, I can remember one time I'm in the emergency room and they don't give me enough. They don't give me enough of the stuff that I need to calm my nerves. And I pull out the IV and I walk to the store because they are not giving me what I need, right? And this goes on and on. And so what happened for me is God intervened, and all the things I swore I'd never do after losing my daughter. It was like 10 minutes till midnight. I had a car out in the front. It was not registered. I had no insurance. It only ran when it wanted to. I had no license, but I needed to get to the store, right? And I thought I could make it. It's just a quick drive around the corner to Shell, right? And so I get in the car, and I'm just shaking out of my skin. I'm crawling out of my skin. I need a drink, and I get to the store, and I got my change that I've scrounged up from God knows where, probably begged it off of my adult kids at this point. And I get my 240s because I'm drinking for effect, not for taste, right? So I'm going for whatever's on sale in the liquor store. They have those stickers on the door, 2 King Cobras, 2 for $4, I don't know, whatever it is. That's what I'm getting. That's in my budget, right? And I get my 240s, and it went so well that I'm like, well, I could just make it to Jack in the Box right across the street, right? So I get to Jack in the Box. I get my 2 tacos because that's what's in my budget. Back then, they were 2 for $1. And I pull out of Jack in the Box, and I forget to turn my lights back on, and I pull out, and a car's coming down the road 45 miles an hour. And the only reason the car didn't hit me is because I swerved and got stuck on an embankment. And I'm just going to shorten this part of my story up. I get arrested at home a couple of hours later, and I'm like, that's not going to hold up in court. I'm home, and I'm drinking, and that's not going to hold up. So they arrest me, and they cite and release me. And I swear that's God, So I thank you, God. Thank you so much. I swear I'm going to get my shit together. I am. This is it. This is my sign. Well, I go to court 30 days later, and I go into the little municipal court where they tell me to go, and my name's not on the docket. It's not on the paper on the wall. So I asked the gentleman at the counter, hey, my name's not on the list, so he looks me up in the computer. He goes, oh, you're over across the way at the Superior Court. So my friend gives me some party favors, some extracurricular things to get me through court so that I can get through until I can get a drink. And so I walk across the street, and I'm like, man, I can't wait to get out of here. I need a drink. And I get to court, and I'm the first case they call. I'm remanded into custody. My bail is set at $100,000. And the head of the DUI task force, Kern County, had just received a few $100,000 grant to prosecute repeat offenders, and I was going to be the poster child, right? And they made it very clear that I was a loaded weapon behind the wheel of a car, and they were going to put me away for as long as they could. And my ego and my delusion, they're just trying to scare me. I know they're just trying to scare me. I'm going to ride this out in county jail, right? And there's, nobody I can call. My family's had it. My adult sons are probably so relieved that I'm in jail, and I'm sitting there, and they don't offer me a plea bargain, right? And my public defender, of course, because I can't afford an attorney, she says, Jocelyn, they're not going to offer you a plea bargain. I'm going to trial then. I'm not going to accept the maximum sentence, which was 7 years. So it was 3 years for felony DUI, doubled, and because I had a prior strike, they gave me they could double your sentence and then add a 1-year enhancement. So I'm looking at 7 years in state prison, and I thought, well, I have nothing to lose, right? So I set forth to go to trial, and at first I'm dressing out, and, trying to look as nice as I can. I beg my son to grab, one of my dresses from the closet. And Mothers Against Drunk Driving was in every one of my court hearings, and they were sitting like this far from me. And they all got to stand up and introduce themselves during my trial, right? And I began to really resent these women. And I thought, they're getting more attention than me, and this is my trial. And I knew I was going to lose, right? So I stopped dressing out. I thought, I'm just going in my jail scrubs. Screw this, I'm going to lose anyway. So I did. I just started, towards the end of my trial, I just showed up in, whatever I'm wearing in the county jail and my orange scrubs. And when they found me guilty, the jury, it took them less than 10 minutes. And I can tell you that when I went back to the holding tank, there was nobody else in there because everyone was in regular court. And if there was a noose, I would have walked into it. I wanted to die. I couldn't believe that I was going to prison for 7 years. And I remember just crying out to whatever, because I didn't know what I thought about God at the time. Like, how could this be happening to me? I'm not a bad person. I would never intentionally harm anyone. And it's when I think I had just a slight window of opportunity to have that moment of clarity where I was just told, you just have to surrender, right? And I'm like, well, what do you want me to surrender? I freaking lost everything, right? And, God has a really funny sense of humor because I end up right back at the same. I had to walk through the whole prison, level 4 prison yard. I get held back on a medical hold, but I eventually end up back at the Malibu fire camp. And I'm going to tell you that one of the most profound experiences that I have had thus far in my sobriety is H&I is coming in. And it's some of the same people that were coming in all those years ago. And, I started to understand a little bit about what surrender means to me. And it's setting aside everything I think I know and just being willing to take some direction. Because what my direction gets me is another prison term, right? When I start thinking I know, this is where I end up. So I'm going to start listening to other people. And it was suggested that I get a sponsor through the correspondence, not a sponsor, a pen pal through the correspondence program through World Services, GSO. So I write them, and they don't ask you why you're in prison, your name, your age, how much sobriety date, and your release date. Small little paper, right? Sent it in. So if you ever want to write somebody that's in prison, same thing. They don't ask you if you've ever been to prison. They just connect you. They ask you how much sobriety you have, your name, whatever. So I get a letter from Wendy Z, and I have her permission to out her, from Berkeley, Michigan. So they connect you with somebody clear across the United States so you do not harass them when you get out of prison, right, or stalk them. And so I get a letter from Wendy Z, and this was my first God shot. She tells me she'd been to prison for gross vehicular manslaughter and that she knew exactly what I was going through. And she would tell me, if you want to stay sober, you're going to have to share your story. And I would tell her, there's no way that I can talk about my accident without, just bawling. And it would be so hard for me. And she said, no, you're going to have to if you want to stay sober. And this woman, for over 2 years, wrote me faithfully. And I know what a commitment that is, because I thought, I'm going to do that commitment when I get out, and I did it. And it's a commitment, to sit there and read what somebody's writing and then respond back by writing back. And this woman did this for 2 years. And, so a lot of God shots happened while I was in camp. Some laws passed about over-sentencing of nonviolent, non-serious offenders, and my PC code happened to fall in there. And so I got some time taken off my sentence. And I had this opportunity to go to a brand new program in Bakersfield where I'd be on an ankle monitor, and I'd get to finish out my last 2 years of my sentence. And it was like a rehab. It was set up like a rehab, but ran by parole agents. And if you do well after a few months, you get to go out and get a job, right? And my ego was like, well, this is my hometown, and I'm not going to have a problem, right? So I do good in the program. I reach out to a family friend. I get a sponsor. I'm using that term very loosely at this point. I get a sponsor, and I'm doing the deal in the program, and it's time for me to go out and find a job, right? And we have to take public transportation, and I'm going out, and I'm not getting a job. I went on 9 job interviews, and I am not exaggerating. 9 job interviews, and nobody would hire me. I interviewed at 3 different Chipotles, 3, and not one of them hired me. And I'm like, what the heck, And I really do look back on that now, and I know that, that was it was a great slap to my ego, right? Because I really didn't think that it was going to be like that, and it was. And there was a woman at the place where I was at, and she said, Hernandez, I see you. I want you to go up to Subway, and I want you to ask for Annette. And I thought, Subway? Chipotle was as low as I'll go, right? So but I need a job, right? So I walk up to Subway and I interview, and they act like it's a really important job. Like that interview wasn't even easy. So I go back and they call me, right? And I get the job. And what I'm going to tell you about Subway is those people became my family. The owner told me, you know what, Jocelyn, I know you're not going to be with us long, but as long as you're here, we're your family. If you need time off to handle all of those things you have to take care of, right? You know, DUI school, parole things. She goes, you just let me know and we'll make sure you get the time off. And I was like, wow, you know, and God put me right where I was supposed to be. And to this day, you know, all these years later, I can still call on those individuals. I just recently needed reference letters, and I got to call the owner of Subway and ask her for a reference letter, you know? And I'm just so in awe of where, you know, God put me. So I end up paroling from this program. I go to sober living. I have nowhere else to go. And, you know, I'm just so busy rebuilding my life, right? And I would be walking to the bus. You know, Bakersfield's like 110 in the summer, and I'd be at the bus stop. And, you know, here I am, 46 years old, and people would be, because it wasn't in the greatest area of Bakersfield where their sober living was, and people would drive by and throw stuff out their car at me and you know, do all the things, and I would just be like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this, you know, and I'd be walking home, sweat dripping down me in my Subway uniform, and you know, my sponsor would tell me, one foot in front of the other, Jocelyn, you're going to be amazed a year from now. Right? And I believed her. So I kept trudging and I kept trudging, right? And I saved up my money and I got a license. I got my license back after being revoked twice, right? But I had to have that breathing thing in my car, and I saved up enough money and I got my little studio apartment, and you know, I'm busy, super busy. But then I wasn't. And I'm in my studio apartment, and I think I'm doing big things because I'm a secretary at a little meeting in Bakersfield, right? And I think that, you know, I think I'm doing the deal, but I'm miserable. A year into my sobriety, I'm miserable, and I'm starting to be full of fear again. And I'm like, what on earth? How could this be happening? I'm sober. I should be feeling better. And I'm not feeling better. And that gaping hole of fear and not enoughness came back. And I knew that if I didn't do something different, you know, that I was going to drink. And there was a woman that came to the meeting. She didn't come regularly, but she'd come to the meeting that I would secretary. And I knew she had been to prison and had gotten a pardon from, you know, the governor, and she had this amazing job. You know, when you're new, it's all about the job, and I remember thinking, God, everyone in AA has such nice cars, you know, and for me, that really was the attraction at the beginning, right? And I would look at her and I think, my God, and she didn't act like she'd been to prison, right? And so I thought, I'm going to ask her to be my sponsor, but I was so intimidated by her because when she spoke, I really felt like God was talking to me, and I didn't have the courage to go up to her and say, would you be my sponsor? So I messaged her on Facebook, and I said, will you be my sponsor? And she said, I want you to call me tomorrow at 7 p.m. And I'm going to tell you, she meant 7 p.m. She did not mean 7:05 or 6:55. I'm going to set an alarm. I'm going to respect your time. I ask that you respect my time as well. And I was like, ooh, okay. So 9 years later, I still call her right on time. So, yeah, so I asked her. She said, you know, she allowed me to tell her my sad sob, woes me, poor Jocelyn's story. You'd drink too if you had my life. And she said, you know, Jocelyn, that was the one and only time, by the way, that she let me do that. That was it, right? And she said, you know, I'd be willing to work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with you, but what I need you to know is that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of your troubles, and that if your family ever wanted anything to do with you, you don't have that coming. As a matter of fact, she really said this, it would be a miracle, right? If your kids ever wanted you back in their lives, she said, but what I can tell you, if you work the 12 steps to the best, honestly and to the best of your ability, you will experience the freedom that you get to see some of us in the rooms experience. And I wanted that. And I was willing, right? So I set forth to work the steps with my sponsor. And I can tell you, most days I would leave. We'd meet every week, go through the big book line by line, looking up words, acting like I don't know what words mean, right? Having to look up everything. And I would leave her house sometimes, and I would think, this lady doesn't even like me. She doesn't. And I would tell myself, I'm going to fire her as soon as we're done with the steps. And then she'd try and tell me about relationships. I'd be like, she's just jealous. She might want to be single for the rest of her life, but that I don't want to stay single for the rest of it. But what happened when we got done with me doing my fifth step, right? Admitting to God, another human being, the exact nature of my wrongs, my life transformed, and I couldn't tell you that it happened when it happened. It was always looking back in retrospect, right? But things just got more colorful, right? I got to be a little more useful. I got to get out of myself, right? I got to see things through a different pair of glasses, as you will, right? My perspective started to change. I started to be a better employee. Just things really started to change, and I wanted more of that, and I wanted to continue doing the steps. And what I can tell you is it is the result of her guidance and God that I had a profound spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. And it's been an incredible ride. And I'll tell you, I will tell you this. So I got a job. I needed a good job, right? I couldn't work at Subway for the rest of my life as much as I wanted to. I could not do that, right? So I start applying for jobs that have insurance. And I go through this program that trains convicted felons to go re-enter the work field, and I get trained in the medical field, and I get offered this job with this really good company that has really good benefits, and I'll have weekends off, right? And, the background check took forever, which it usually does when you have a background. So, and so many doors had slammed in my face. I'm going to tell you, this was not my first big job I applied for, but I really wanted this job. And I can remember I got called into HR, and the lady put her hand on my paperwork and said, "Nobody needs to know about this. You're not going to be driving for us. Welcome to Gem Care." I'm trying not to name drop, but anyway, so I got the job, right? And I'm so excited, and I'm just so grateful, right? 30 days into my job, we get bought out by a very large company that has several hospitals throughout California. It's a huge company, and they're like, "Welcome to we do background checks on everyone, 0 tolerance, 7 years," right? And I'm like, oh my God. And my sponsor would tell me while I was sitting there, waiting for the background check, she'd go, Jocelyn, if you're supposed to be there, you'll be there. And if not, God has something better in store for you, right? And some days I would be like mimicking her what she's saying. If some days, or if I'm supposed to be there, right? But other days I really felt like I genuinely was not in fear, right? And I could tell you, 8-9 years later, I still was in that job in sobriety. It was an incredible ride. I just recently left that job. I want to tell you, I obtained my master's degree in social work, and I left that job to pursue licensure with the state. And when I left, I got to tell you, I can't drive through. Hello, human kindness. I can't see those signs. It makes me want to cry. Every time I see the sign, I'm like, oh, I just miss everybody. I grew up with that job. I learned to stop stepping on toes. I learned to be an employee amongst many employees, right? I got to be one of many in that job. My sponsor walked me through all of that, and it was so incredible. So one of the other things that has happened in my sobriety is, my parents. My dad was very reluctant to have a relationship with me. They had moved to Florida and then South Carolina and then to Pennsylvania, and my mom had Alzheimer's, and he was really getting concerned with her. So, my sponsor said, I want you to call your parents every week and not ask for anything, right? Because my MO was, I'm going to manipulate you to get what I need and then just guilt trip you, right? And so I'd call my dad every week and not ask for anything, and eventually he offered to fly me and my granddaughter to Pennsylvania to visit. And I went, and it was an incredible visit, and he got to see me in action in sobriety, right? And, just trying to be helpful. And I came back to California, and I was like, God, that was an incredible experience. And a few weeks later, my dad calls me, and he said, I'm going to need help with your mom. I want you to look for a house in Bakersfield. I'll buy the home, and I want you to help me take care of your mother. And so he moves to Bakersfield with my mom, right? And towards the end, they were married over 40 years. And towards the end, my dad couldn't handle it. He would argue with her, and I'd be like, oh my God, Dad, you can't. Like, what she says is what she knows. And if my mom said the sky was green, I'm like, that's a beautiful green sky, right? And I was just able to connect with her in a way I had never been able to in my entire life. This is a woman that I could not stand growing up. And it was incredible that I got to have that experience with her and make that living amends, right? And towards the end, my dad just couldn't even see her. Hospice was called in. And I'd get to go sit with my mom every day after work and read to her and do all the things that she would love. And when I knew that she was transitioning, hospice told me what to look for, and I knew she was transitioning. I knew she was holding on, and I couldn't figure out why, and it hit me. She was devout Catholic her entire life, and she was waiting for her last sacrament for the priest. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I looked up Catholic churches, called a church, and I didn't know they did that. They're like on call. A priest came, and she passed away a few hours later. She was waiting for the priest, and it was such a profound experience being able to be there for my mother. And I'm gonna close with two things that have happened in my sobriety. There have been so many gifts, and and it's not about the material things. I've heard another speaker say those are just the side effects of doing the work, man. When we get in there and we do the work and we're thinking of others and we're helping other alcoholics, life just gets really big and beautiful, right? And so one of the things that happened is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I apparently, 2-3 years into my sobriety, I'm having a conversation with my sponsor and some other women, and and somebody brings up Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and I get just a really sour look on my face. And she says, "Did you leave them off of your inventory?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I did." And I was like, I was bracing myself. And she said, "I want you to call Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and I want you to ask them how you can be of service." And I thought, oh, you gotta be kidding me. And so I called, and it was during COVID, and they didn't answer. I'm like, my side of the street's clean. And like a day later, the lady called me, and she said, she was not very kind either. She said, she's very professional, but she said, "I know who you are. I followed your case. What's changed?" That was exactly what she said to me. And I followed the script on my little index card, and I said, "Well, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm calling to see if I could be of service to Mothers Against Drunk Driving." And I'm hoping and praying that she says, "Well, you just keep doing what you're doing. No, thank you." But she says, "As a matter of fact, there's this impact panel that we have, and I'd like you to come." And so I called my sponsor, and I said, "I've been asked to go to this impact panel." And she's like, "Call me when you're done with that," right? So I go, and it's a room like this with about this many people. I'm like, my God. I go, "Is this quarterly?" She said, "No, this is monthly, and these are repeat offenders." And she's totally like, no emotion, like really talking to me very matter-of-factly. But what happened is that district attorney that prosecuted me showed up that night. And I got to talk to him, and he was much more kind than she was. And I got to tell him what has transpired as the result of getting sober and being, in a program of recovery. And he told me, I never disliked you. I felt sorry for you, and I knew that you had a problem. And he goes, "Just keep doing what you're doing and helping as many people as you can." And I left that impact panel, and I mean it when I say I felt like 100 pounds had been lifted off of my shoulders. And I cried like I haven't cried since I lost my daughter. And I knew right then and there the freedom that my sponsor was talking about. I knew it, and I wanted more. I was like, this is incredible, right? So the next thing that I always like to close with is, I had a 2-year-old little granddaughter. She is now 7. Her name is Emma, and she is the apple of my eye, the light of my life, and we save a seat for her in the rooms because she reminds me of me. But when she was 2 years old, I'd go and pick up Emma on the weekends and bring her over to our fun, sober house, and just do all the things that grandparents get to do. We get do-overs in this program, right? And it's amazing. And, Emma's parents were having a hard time staying sober. And they eventually, Emma and her brother, who is my bonus grandson, they got taken into protective custody with Child Protective Services. And I was devastated because I'm like, they're never going to let me pick up Emma. that's it. If she's in foster care, they'd never let me pick up a child with my background. And my sponsor, are you God? And I said, no, Monica, I'm not God. Well, why don't you let God decide what is going to happen? And I couldn't relate to that. I'm like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I know, I worked for the Department of Human Services 10 years. Don't you know who I am? And she said, let me tell you this. Wouldn't you want to tell Emma that you did everything that you could? Even if it doesn't work out, wouldn't you want to be able to tell that little girl that? And that I could wrap my head around, and I said yes. So I set forth to request a criminal exemption. And it was a very arduous process, probably took 8 months, no stone unturned, very painful, trudging up the past, all the things they required. If anybody's had to go through that kind of background check, it's just incredible. And I made it through, and this woman came to my house to interview me, and we just had this connection. And at the end, she said, thank you for being such a great example of the human experience and the capacity to change. And I started crying, and it looked like she was going to cry too. And I'm like, this is so weird. And, the synchronicities of sobriety. And I look at her and I say, well, how long will it take you to make your decision? And she said, you'll be hearing something in about a week. I have to write up my report. And a week later, I get a call that I have been cleared. I've been granted a criminal exemption. And by this time, my little Emma is already with her other grandma, and she's doing good, but I get to pick her up now, right? And I'm so happy, right? And I get a call, and they're like, are you available for placement? And I'm like, well, I just got cleared for my grandkids. And they're like, no, you were cleared for any child ages 1 through 19. And there was a kid sitting in juvenile hall, and if they didn't find him a placement, he was going to go to a group home. And I was engaged to my wonderful husband at the time, and I said, I know this isn't what you signed up for, but when God flies open a door that wide, I think I need to walk through it, right? And he agreed, and we went and picked up this kiddo, and we've had a few placements over the years, and I can tell you we don't have these sunshine and rainbows happy stories that we can tell you, but what I can tell you is that I got to see life through the eyes of my parents, right? And I get to make a small difference in very small ways with these kids and just try to be a good example, right? And give them the hope that I so desperately needed when I was their age. And I'm going to close out with this, I don't do this thing perfectly by any means, I've heard people refer to steps 10, 11, and 12 as the maintenance steps. I don't consider them maintenance steps. I don't want to maintain. I want to continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness. I want to continue to expand my spiritual connection with God, right? I want to continue to work with other alcoholics. And what I can tell you is I have an incredible life today. Everything I have in my life is the direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous. I cannot take credit for any of it. And it's a big, huge, beautiful life, and it's the result of you showing me how to do this thing one day at a time. Thank you so much.